here's the estimates from, or here's the measurements that were reported in the literature for some 70 different samples. The average value in units of what's called percent modern carbon. It's the number of samples on the upper axis over here. It's just a histogram. The average value of this turns out to be about 0.292% of the modern carbon that we have today, which is something less than about 30,000 years old. The carbon that's actually in the coal tells you that the coal has to be something less than 30,000 years old, and yet the conventional community says it's over 100 million years old. We did some of our own samples. We collected 10 samples from the coal lab at Pennsylvania State University and sent them in for our own analysis, and we repeated that. We came up with an average of about 0.247. So we confirmed that the numbers that are being reported in the literature are legitimate from our perspective as well. Well, while we were at that, we decided, you know, if carbon-14 is in coal, and that's possibly could be contaminated. You can imagine water percolating down through the soil could bring carbon-14 potentially into coal, so you could be criticized as it's not legitimate. What about diamonds? Is there possibly carbon-14 in diamonds? So the first time this was ever done, John Baumgartner took some diamonds, sent them to the lab. Took us about 2 years to get this done because the diamonds in the ovens that they were trying to vaporize diamonds, if you can imagine vaporizing diamonds at several thousand degrees, they kept exploding and destroying their ovens. They finally got a new oven that didn't get blown up, vaporized these diamonds, and they were able to find carbon-14 in diamonds. Now, not quite as high as they are in coal. It was on the order of about 0.1% modern carbon. But we have a very good case here where diamonds are not going to be contaminated. They were probably formed on the order of, in conventional time frames, of about 3 billion years ago, down deep in the earth, and the carbon-14 is in the diamond, and it's not going to be contaminated because diamond is the hardest substance known, and you don't have to worry about being criticized for contamination of the diamond, and yet the carbon-14 is there. The estimates are that the diamonds are less than about 50,000 years. Now, that 50,000 compared to 3 billion, that's a big difference. Now, you have to understand that there's other processes like the flood that was involved in this that are not counted in conventional age dating. But this information from diamonds has really gotten the attention of the conventional community. By the way, we've been reporting these results at the American Geophysical Union meetings up in San Francisco. And we've been getting reactions from the conventional scientists, and they're just basically scratching their head and saying, boy, you guys have got something here. Keep working on this. This is fascinating. We don't know what it means, but keep going. So we got some encouragement. Okay, just quickly, we've also wondered if decay could be accelerated, how theoretically would that be possible? Well, Dr. Chaffin has looked at the conceptual idea of changing the well depth in the nucleus of atoms and the well width, and he's found that you can actually increase the decay rates by many, many orders of magnitude by just simply making those slight changes. Now, we don't know whether the changes were made that way by God or what actually caused the decay rate to occur, but theoretically it is possible. Now, more exciting than that is, under very unique circumstances, it's now being reported in the conventional literature, under certain situations, decay rates have been able to be changed by many orders of magnitude as well. That's for alpha decay. Dr. Chaffin, yes? I'm sorry, well depth is the potential well inside of a diamond, inside of a nucleus, where the distance between particles can be measured in potential energy, and it's kind of a well, it's called a well in energy. That's a very technical term, so I can't go any more into it right now. Sorry, got limited time here. We've also looked at beta decay, and even though string theory is very theoretical and may not be the final answer, there seems to be some value in looking at string theory to understand that beta decay could be changed dramatically as well. Finally, I want to report on one study here, and then I'm going to have to quit, and that's Dr. Steve Boyd's work in looking at different verb forms in the Old Testament to try to distinguish between narrative and poetic passages. Mike talked about this earlier today in terms of the order of words can help distinguish. Well, he looked at some different forms here. He did a statistical comparison of the narrative and the poetic passages by looking at the frequency of different verb forms, preterite, imperfect, and perfect verb forms. And he found passages in one place that were known to be a literal description or a narrative of what occurred, and then a poetical description of it, kind of flowery and so on, compared those and was able to get a general rule, and then went back and applied this in a rigid statistical sense to all the passages, and then found out what the Genesis passages would be on the creation and the flood. And here's a histogram, sort of, to show you. It's a three-dimensional histogram. For example, Exodus 14 is a literal passage, and Exodus 15 is a poetic passage of the same event. And you'll notice the green here is the preterite verb forms. There's a large number of preterites and a relatively low number of imperfect and perfect verb forms in that passage, and just the opposite in the poetic passage. It had a low number of preterite verb forms and a high number of imperfect and perfect verb forms. He also dealt with wa perfect, which is a fourth verb form in the back here. He did the same thing in a passage of Judges 4 and Judges 5, and Genesis 1:1 and Psalm 104. Genesis 1:1 is the narrative passage. Psalm 104 is the poetic passage. And same thing on the flood and in Psalms 105. The statistical result of this was that he was able to separate the poetic passages very easily with these verb forms from the narrative passages up here, and there's hardly any overlap between the two. Here's one that's kind of in the poetry form, even though it is considered a narrative. So based on these rules, he was able to get a distinction between narrative and poetic to about the 5th decimal place, so that when you have certain characteristics, you absolutely know it's narrative and not poetic. So we have great confidence that Genesis 1, well, I should have shown that, I'm sorry. Here's Genesis 1:1 up here, very strongly into the narrative portion. So we have confidence that Genesis is a real, literal description of events, not just allegorical poetry. Okay, well, here's the passage in 1 Samuel 17 that I wanted to quote, that we started this project, and we give great credit to the Lord in this. This is David standing before Goliath and taunting Goliath, in a sense, telling him who he depends upon. I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. The Lord saveth not with sword and spear. The battle is the Lord's. He will give you into our hands. That's the verse that we took as our verse for this project, and the Lord provided in magnificent ways. It truly is a young world from the data we have. Now, let me just tell you a couple quick things, and I'm going to stop and take a couple of questions. The R.A.T.E project was an 8-year-long project, cost about $1.25 million. It was so successful, not only in fundraising, but the results of the research, that we were encouraged to start several projects like this starting this year after the R.A.T.E project was over. The next project we're going to do of that magnitude is the gene project, and we're working with genetics, trying to understand how mutations work and accumulate in our body. One of the first results that came out of this was the mutations occur on the order of about 100 mutations per person, in other words, per generation, and they occur so rapidly that in less than like 10,000 years, we'd all be dead. If we've been here more than 10,000 years, we wouldn't be here. So that the mutations are really an important issue. It's not in terms of forming new species or new life forms, but making the species, it prevents its viability. It can't continue because after enough information is destroyed in the DNA, it can't function. That's why we're getting more ill with time, our whole population. Anyway, we're going to do a lot more of those kind of studies. The FAST project, by the way, that's Dr. Criswell and Dr. John Sanford are going to be doing that project. These are estimates for some of the costs for it. The FAST project by Dr. Austin is flood-activated sedimentation and tectonics. a major geology project to look at events and processes in the Genesis flood. The Epiphany project is a computer simulation